The sun bounced off the polished glass storefronts along Rodeo Drive as Sandra Bullock walked with unhurried steps. She'd chosen today, a surprisingly quiet Tuesday morning, to do something she rarely had time for anymore: shop in peace. No filming schedule, no press junkets, just a few hours to herself in Beverly Hills. Sandra adjusted her simple baseball cap and oversized sunglasses. She wasn't trying to hide exactly, but the casual outfit and minimal makeup gave her a welcome anonymity. Most people expected celebrities to look like their red carpet photos all the time. Reality was much more comfortable: worn jeans, a soft gray sweater, and her favorite sneakers. The Cartier boutique stood like a temple of luxury among the high-end shops. Sandra hesitated before the entrance, remembering she was meeting Keanu for lunch afterward. They'd known each other for years, their friendship surviving Hollywood's typical churn of temporary connections. There was something grounding about spending time with someone who remembered you from before everything changed, from when you were still figuring things out. A uniformed doorman nodded as she entered, not recognizing her but trained to treat everyone as potentially important. Sandra smiled her thanks, appreciating the small courtesies that came without the weight of recognition. Inside, the boutique was a masterpiece of understated wealth. Glass cases lined the walls, each item carefully lit to capture the fire of diamonds and the rich glow of gold. The carpet absorbed sound, creating a hushed atmosphere that made normal conversation feel like an intrusion. Only 3 other customers browsed the displays, each attended by their own sales associate. "May I help you find something today?" A young woman with immaculate posture approached Sandra. Her name tag read Lily, and her smile was professional, but warm. "I'm just looking, thank you," Sandra said. "I might need a gift for someone soon, but today I'm getting ideas." Lily nodded. "Please take your time. I'm here if you have any questions." She stepped back respectfully, giving Sandra space without abandoning her. Sandra moved slowly from case to case, genuinely interested in the craftsmanship. She'd grown up far from this world of casual luxury. Even now, after years of success, there was still a part of her that remembered watching her mother carefully budget for groceries. The prices mentally added up as they moved through the store. At the far end of the boutique, near a display of watches, a commotion broke the reverent quiet. A woman with platinum blonde hair styled in an elaborate updo was speaking loudly to the manager. Her voice carried across the store, slicing through the carefully maintained atmosphere. "I specifically called ahead about the sapphire collection. Thomas assured me the pieces would be ready for my viewing." The woman tapped manicured nails against the glass counter. Her cream-colored suit probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and diamonds flashed from her ears, neck, and wrists with every movement. "Mrs. Harrington, I apologize for the confusion. Thomas is preparing those pieces right now in our private viewing room," the manager said, his voice calm and practiced. "It will only be a few more minutes. Perhaps I can offer you some champagne while you wait?" The woman, Mrs. Harrington, sighed dramatically. "I suppose that will have to do. My charity luncheon starts at 1 and I still need to make an appearance at the peninsula to check on the flower arrangements." Sandra watched from the corner of her eye, not out of judgment but simple curiosity. She'd played characters like Mrs. Harrington before, women whose external perfection masked complicated inner lives. In movies, there was always more to the story than what first appeared. Lily approached again, noticing Sandra's interest in a particular bracelet. "That piece is quite special. The design was inspired by celestial movements. See how the diamonds seem to orbit around the central sapphire?" Sandra lifted her gaze from the bracelet. "It's beautiful. Something about it feels both classic and modern at the same time." As Lily carefully removed the bracelet from the display, the boutique's front door opened. A middle-aged couple entered, looking slightly overwhelmed by the opulence. They were well-dressed but lacked the practiced ease of regular Cartier customers. The woman clutched her husband's arm as they hesitantly moved into the space. Mrs. Harrington's gaze swept over them, dismissively before returning to her champagne. One of her hands absently touched her hair, checking that every strand remained in place. "Would you like to try it on?" Lily asked, holding the bracelet. Sandra nodded, extending her wrist. The weight of the piece surprised her. substantial without being heavy, the metal cool against her skin. "It suits you," Lily said. Sandra turned her wrist, watching light play across the stones. "I don't know if it's really me, though." "Jewelry isn't about who you are every day," Lily said. "It's about celebrating moments when you want to be something more." Something about the young woman's observation struck Sandra as unusually perceptive. That's a lovely way to think about it. Across the boutique, Mrs. Harrington had noticed the manager attending to the new couple. Her champagne glass clinked loudly as she set it down. "Thomas," she called out, "how much longer for my private viewing?" The manager turned with practiced smoothness. "Just another moment, Mrs. Harrington. Pavel is making final preparations." Mrs. Harrington made a show of checking her diamond-encrusted watch. "Time is precisely what I don't have today." Sandra removed the bracelet, handing it back to Lily. "Thank you for showing me. I might come back for it." Lily returned the piece to its display, her movements careful and precise. "Of course, we're here whenever you decide." Sandra moved to another section, this one featuring necklaces arranged by stone type. She found herself drawn to simpler designs, pieces that felt like they told a story rather than simply displayed wealth. The middle-aged couple had drifted closer to where Sandra stood. The woman's eyes widened slightly as she looked at the price card beside a modest-looking pendant. "Maybe we should try somewhere else," she whispered to her husband, not quite quietly enough. "Nonsense," he replied. "It's our 30th anniversary. If not now, when?" Something about their exchange made Sandra smile. Love that lasted decades deserved to be celebrated, regardless of price tags. The boutique door opened again, and Sandra glanced up automatically. Her smile widened as she recognized the tall figure who entered. Keanu Reeves had arrived early for their lunch, his presence immediately changing the energy of the room. Like Sandra, he was dressed casually, dark jeans, a well-worn leather jacket, and boots that had seen many miles. His hair fell to his shoulders and a scruffy beard framed his face. He paused just inside the door, scanning the boutique until his eyes met hers. Before he could move toward her, Mrs. Harrington's voice cut through the space again. "Finally," she exclaimed, as a third employee emerged from a back room. "Pavel, Thomas said you've been preparing the collection all this time. I expected diamonds to be actively forming under such pressure." The new employee, presumably Pavel, maintained a professional smile. "My apologies for the wait, Mrs. Harrington. If you'll follow me to the private viewing room, everything is arranged for you now." Mrs. Harrington gathered her designer purse and empty champagne glass. As she stood, her gaze swept across the store again, lingering briefly on Keanu before moving to Sandra. Something in her expression shifted, a momentary calculation occurring behind her eyes. Sandra recognized that look. It was the assessment of someone trying to place a face, to determine if the person before them was important enough to acknowledge. In her simple outfit, without the styling team and professional makeup that transformed her for cameras, Sandra often failed such assessments. Mrs. Harrington's eyes narrowed slightly before she turned away, clearly deciding Sandra wasn't worth her attention. As she followed Pavel toward the back of the boutique, she passed close to the middle-aged couple, who had moved to examine a display of wedding bands. Her shoulder brushed against the woman's arm. "Oh," the woman exclaimed, stumbling slightly. "Mrs." Harrington paused, looking down at where their bodies had made contact as if checking for damage. "You really should be more careful," she said coldly. "This suit is Chanel." The woman flushed with embarrassment. "I'm sorry, I didn't—" "It's fine," Mrs. Harrington cut her off. "Just be aware of your surroundings." Her gaze flicked to the wedding bands they'd been examining, among the least expensive items in the store. Perhaps Zales would offer more appropriate options for your budget. The couple stood frozen, the husband's face reddening with a different kind of emotion than his wife's embarrassment. Before he could respond, Keanu had crossed the boutique, his movement casual but purposeful. Sandra watched him approach, already moving to intercept her friend before the situation escalated. She'd always admired Keanu's sense of timing. It served him as well in life as it did in his action films. Something told her they were about to need it. The morning that had begun so peacefully was about to become considerably more interesting. As Sandra reached Keanu's side, she couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. In her films, this would be the moment where everything changed, the quiet before a storm of consequences. Keanu reached Sandra's side with that relaxed walk of his, the one that somehow seemed both casual and purposeful. His eyes, warm with recognition, met hers briefly before shifting to take in the scene unfolding before them. The middle-aged couple stood rigid with embarrassment while Mrs. Harrington looked down at them with barely concealed disdain. "Hey," Keanu said quietly to Sandra, his voice just above a whisper. "I'm early." "Perfect timing, actually," Sandra replied, equally soft. Her instinct to diffuse tension kicked in, a trait that had served her well throughout her career. She stepped forward slightly, inserting herself into the uncomfortable tableau. "Excuse me," she said, addressing the couple with a warm smile. "I couldn't help overhearing. Are you celebrating an anniversary?" The woman blinked in surprise, her cheeks still flushed from Mrs. Harrington's comment. "Yep, our 30th. "That's wonderful," Sandra said genuinely. "Congratulations." Mrs. Harrington made a small sound, something between a scoff and a sigh, and glanced pointedly at Pavel, who stood waiting to escort her to the private viewing room. But instead of following him, she turned her attention fully to Sandra. "I'm sorry, but are you a sales associate?" Mrs. Harrington asked, her tone making it clear she knew the answer was no. "Because these people were being helped." She gestured, vaguely toward the manager who had stepped away to assist another customer. Sandra kept her expression neutral. "No, I was just admiring their commitment. 30 years is impressive." Mrs. Harrington's eyes narrowed as she studied Sandra more, carefully. There was that look again, the one people got when they were trying to place her face. Without the styling team, the carefully selected gowns, and the professional makeup that transformed her for cameras, Sandra often slipped under the radar of recognition. "Well, how nice for you to make friends while shopping," Mrs. Harrington said with a thin smile. "Though some of us come here to actually make purchases." Her gaze swept over Sandra's casual outfit, lingering disapprovingly on her worn sneakers. The couple shifted uncomfortably. The husband placed a protective hand on his wife's arm. "We should go," he said quietly. "No, please," Sandra said. "Don't leave on my account." Mrs. Harrington laughed, a brittle sound that held no warmth. "Oh, it wouldn't be on your account. Dear, I think we all know who can and cannot afford to shop here." She turned to Pavel. "I believe I've waited long enough. Shall we?" Pavel's professional mask slipped just slightly, discomfort flashing across his face before he regained his composure. "Of course, Mrs. Harrington. This way, please." But Mrs. Harrington didn't move. Instead, she turned to look at Keanu, who had been standing quietly beside Sandra. Recognition dawned in her eyes almost instantly. "Oh my goodness," she said, her voice shifting to something honey-sweet. "You're Keanu Reeves." Keanu nodded once, a small, polite acknowledgement without warmth. "Yes. I absolutely loved you in, well, everything," Mrs. Harrington gushed, stepping closer to him and completely away from Pavel. "My husband and I just watched your latest film last week. Didn't we, Pavel?" Pavel blinked in confusion. "I'm not your husband, Mrs. Harrington." "I know that," she snapped before turning back to Keanu with the smile firmly back in place. "I meant my actual husband, George. He's a big fan. We have a home theater, you know. 70-inch screen, surround sound. Perhaps you'd like to see it sometime." The middle-aged couple used this distraction to begin moving away, clearly eager to escape the uncomfortable situation. Sandra caught the wife's eye and gave her a small, encouraging smile. Mrs. Harrington noticed their retreat and turned, as if remembering something annoying. "Yes, that's right. Perhaps Macy's would be more suitable for your shopping needs." The woman flinched as if she'd been slapped. Something shifted in Sandra's expression, a subtle hardening around her eyes. She'd encountered people like Mrs. Harrington throughout her life, before and after fame. The world was full of them, people who measured others by the price tags they could afford, who built their identity on looking down at those they deemed less worthy. You know, Sandra said, her voice still conversational but carrying a new firmness. I think Cartier is exactly where they should be. Celebrating 3 decades of marriage deserves something special. Mrs. Harrington's expression soured. And who exactly are you to offer shopping advice? The store had grown noticeably quiet. The few other customers had stopped browsing to watch the interaction. The sales associate stood frozen, unsure how to handle the situation without offending a wealthy regular customer. Keanu shifted slightly, moving to stand beside Sandra rather than behind her. It was a small movement, but carried the weight of solidarity. She's someone who knows value when she sees it, he said simply. Mrs. Harrington's eyes darted between them, suspicion forming. Do you two know each other? Before either could respond, one of the other customers gasped audibly. Oh my God, the young woman said, turning to her friend. That's Sandra Bullock. A wave of recognition swept through the boutique. Lily, who had been helping Sandra earlier, covered her mouth with her hand, eyes wide with realization. Mrs. Harrington's face went through a remarkable transformation. Shock, disbelief, then a desperate attempt to recover. Sandra Bullock. Of course it is. I knew you looked familiar. Sandra didn't acknowledge the recognition. Instead, she turned back to the couple, who now stared at her with the same surprise as everyone else. What's your name? She asked the woman gently. Diana, she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. Diana, Sandra repeated warmly. What piece were you looking at before we all got distracted? Diana hesitated, then pointed to a simple platinum band set with a single modest diamond. That one. It's similar to my original wedding ring. We couldn't afford much back then. Mrs. Harrington made a small noise that might have been a laugh. Well, that explains it. Sandra ignored her. It's beautiful, she told Diana sincerely. Classic, timeless. Thomas, the manager, finally found his voice and hurried over. Ms. Bullock, Mr. Reeves, he said, professional mask firmly in place, though his eyes betrayed his anxiety. What an honor to have you both in our boutique today. Is there anything special I can help you with? Yes, Sandra said decisively. I'd like to see the ring Diana was considering. Mrs. Harrington's face flushed red. Excuse me, she interrupted sharply. I have been waiting for my private viewing for 20 minutes now. I have a charity luncheon to attend. Of course, Mrs. Harrington, Thomas said smoothly. Pavel will show you to the private room immediately. Pavel stepped forward again, gesturing toward the back of the store. This time, Mrs. Harrington had little choice but to follow, though she cast one last glance over her shoulder. Part glare, part desperate attempt to catch Keanu's attention. As they walked away, they could hear her asking Pavel in a stage whisper, Did you know Sandra Bullock was here? Why wasn't I informed? I've supported her charities, you know. We practically travel in the same circles. The tension in the boutique broke once she disappeared behind the frosted glass door of the private viewing room. Diana's husband let out a long breath. I'm sorry about that, Sandra said to the couple. Some people forget their manners when they're shopping. You have nothing to apologize for, the husband said, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you for stepping in. Thomas returned with the ring Diana had been admiring. He presented it with the same care and ceremony he would show for $1 million piece. It really is lovely, Sandra said as Diana tried it on. The simple band sparkled under the boutique lights, modest but genuine. We saved for months, Diana's husband explained. We wanted something special for our 30th. Keanu, who had been quiet throughout much of the exchange, spoke up. The best things are worth waiting for. There was something in the way he said it, a sincerity that couldn't be faked. It was the same quality that made audiences connect with him on screen, this fundamental authenticity that no amount of Hollywood polish could manufacture or diminish. Lily approached with a tray bearing flutes of champagne. If I may, she said, I think this calls for a celebration. She offered glasses to Diana and her husband, then to Sandra and Keanu. To 30 years, she toasted. To 30 years, they all echoed, though Sandra noticed Keanu merely touched the glass to his lips without drinking. From the private viewing room came the sound of Mrs. Harrington's voice, raised in what seemed to be complaint. The frosted glass muffled her words, but her tone carried clearly enough. Diana looked in that direction and then back at Sandra. "I've seen all your movies," she said quietly. "But this was better than any of them." Sandra laughed, genuine and warm. "Well, I can't take credit for the script on this one." Thomas cleared his throat discreetly. "Ms. Bullock, Mr. Reeves, would you prefer some privacy for your shopping experience? We have another viewing room available." Keanu glanced at Sandra, a question in his eyes. They'd known each other long enough to communicate without words. "Actually," Sandra said, "I think we're fine right here." She turned back to Diana. "So, 30 years. You must have some stories to tell." As Diana began to speak, the boutique settled back into its normal rhythm. Other customers resumed their browsing, though they cast occasional glances toward the small group by the wedding bands. The sales associates returned to their duties, moving with renewed purpose. Behind the frosted glass, Mrs. Harrington's silhouette could be seen gesturing emphatically. No one seemed particularly concerned about her displeasure anymore. The frosted glass door to the private viewing room swung open with more force than necessary. Mrs. Harrington emerged, her face a careful mask of composure that didn't quite hide the irritation beneath. Pavel followed behind her, looking like a man who had just weathered a significant storm. "Thomas," Mrs. Harrington called, "out," her voice cutting through the pleasant conversation between Sandra, Keanu, and the couple celebrating their anniversary. "I find the lighting in that room completely unacceptable for properly viewing sapphires. The blue tones are entirely misrepresented." Thomas excused himself from a customer and hurried over. "I'm terribly sorry, Mrs. Harrington. Perhaps we could adjust." "Don't bother," she interrupted, waving a dismissive hand. "I'll return next week when Giorgio is back from vacation. He understands my standards." She paused, glancing pointedly toward the small gathering where Keanu and Sandra stood. "I'd like to settle my previous purchases before I leave for my charity luncheon." The not-so-subtle attempt to remind everyone of her wealth and social standing hung in the air. Diana, who had been in the middle of telling Sandra about her first date with her husband, fell silent. "Of course," Thomas said smoothly. "Pavel can assist you at the register immediately." Mrs. Harrington straightened her already impeccable suit jacket. "Actually, I'd prefer you handle it personally, Thomas." Her gaze slid toward Keanu. "Unless you're too busy with your other customers." Sandra caught Keanu's eye, a silent conversation, passing between them. She knew that look. He was considering how to handle the situation. Keanu had always been thoughtful, measuring his words and actions carefully. It was one of the things she appreciated most about him in an industry where reactions were often impulsive and words frequently careless. "Go ahead," Sandra told Thomas, with a warm smile. "We're just enjoying the champagne in good company." Thomas nodded gratefully and escorted Mrs. Harrington to the register near the front of the boutique. Though they moved away, Mrs. Harrington's voice remained deliberately loud enough to carry. "I simply don't understand why they let just anyone walk in nowadays," she said as she opened her designer purse. "There was a time when Cartier maintained certain standards." Diana's husband shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should go," he said, quietly. "We've taken up enough of your time." "Not at all," Keanu replied, his deep voice carrying a gentle authority that made people listen without him ever having to raise it. 30 years of marriage deserves recognition. That's something worth celebrating. It hasn't always been easy, Diana admitted, turning the ring on her finger. The simple band caught the light, its modest diamond sparkling. "We've had tough times." "Those are the parts that matter most," Keanu said. Something in his expression suggested he wasn't just making conversation. "Anyone can stay together when everything's perfect." Sandra nodded in agreement. "The struggles make the good times sweeter." She raised her champagne glass slightly. "To weathering storms together." Diana's eyes glistened with unexpected tears. "Thank you," she said simply, From the front of the store came the distinct sound of a credit card being placed with unnecessary force onto the counter. "I'll take the tennis bracelet as well," Mrs. Harrington announced. "The one with the emerald clasp." Thomas's voice was too soft to hear, but Mrs. Harrington's response carried clearly. "Yes, I'm quite aware of the price. Just add it to my purchases." Lily approached their small group, careful not to interrupt, but clearly with something to say. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but I wondered if you'd like to see anything else while you're here. We have some new pieces that just arrived last week." Before Diana could respond, Mrs. Harrington's voice cut through again. "Thomas, are those people still here? The ones looking at the inexpensive bands? I'm surprised they haven't been asked to leave." The boutique fell silent. Even the other customers looked uncomfortable now. Diana's face flushed deep red, and her husband stood straighter, his jaw tightening. That's when Keanu set down his untouched champagne and took a step forward. Sandra recognized his expression, calm on the surface but with a determined resolve underneath. She'd seen it countless times on set when he was preparing for a difficult scene. "Excuse me," he said simply, then walked toward the front counter, where Mrs. Harrington stood. The entire store seemed to hold its breath. Even Mrs. Harrington appeared momentarily startled by his direct approach. Keanu moved with that distinctive walk of his, not hurried, not aggressive, but purposeful. He stopped at a respectful distance from Mrs. Harrington, his posture relaxed but his presence somehow filling the space between them. "Hi," he said, his greeting disarmingly simple. Mrs. Harrington's demeanor transformed instantly. The haughty expression melted into something approaching girlish delight. "Mr. Reeves, how lovely of you to come say hello properly." She extended her hand as if expecting him to kiss it. "Victoria Harrington, my husband is on the board of—" "I couldn't help overhearing your comments," Keanu said, gently interrupting her but never raising his voice. He didn't take her offered hand. The smile on Mrs. Harrington's face faltered slightly. "My comments? About the couple celebrating their anniversary," Keanu clarified, his tone still conversational but carrying an unmistakable weight. "And earlier, about people who you feel shouldn't be shopping here." Mrs. Harrington blinked rapidly, visibly recalculating her approach. "Oh, that. I was simply concerned about the store's ambiance. Cartier has a certain reputation to maintain, after all." She laughed lightly as if they were sharing a joke between social equals. "I'm sure you understand. You wouldn't want just anyone wandering onto your film sets, would you?" Keanu was quiet for a moment, considering her words. When he finally spoke, his voice was even softer than before, causing everyone to lean in slightly to hear him. "Before my first major role, I worked as a janitor at a high school," he said. "I would clean the bathrooms while students were in class. Sometimes they'd see me in the hallway and look right through me like I was invisible." Mrs. Harrington's smile became fixed, uncertain where this story was leading. "There was this one student," Keanu continued. "He'd always say hello, asked my name, asked how I was doing. Simple stuff. But he saw me as a person, not just someone cleaning up after him." The boutique remained completely silent. Even Thomas had stopped processing Mrs. Harrington's purchases to listen. Years later, after Speed came out, I was at a restaurant in Los Angeles, Keanu said. "And that same kid? Well, he was a man by then, was working as a waiter there. He didn't recognize me at first, just came over to take my order. But I recognized him." Mrs. Harrington's expression suggested she was trying to determine how this anecdote reflected on her or what she was supposed to say in response. "I remembered him because of how he treated me when I was nobody," Keanu concluded simply. "That's always stayed with me." The implication hung in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. "Well," Mrs. Harrington said after an uncomfortable pause, her voice higher than before. "What a charming story. But I fail to see what that has to do with me expressing concern about the clientele in a luxury boutique." Keanu didn't argue or press the point. He just looked at her with those expressive eyes of his, kind but somehow penetrating, as if he could see past her carefully constructed facade to something more vulnerable underneath. Everyone deserves to celebrate their special moments, he said. 30 years of marriage is a pretty incredible achievement. He gestured toward Diana and her husband, who were watching the interaction with a mixture of discomfort and fascination. More impressive than any purchase, don't you think? Mrs. Harrington's mouth opened and closed, no words emerging. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, she seemed genuinely at a loss. Sandra, who had been watching from a few steps back, moved forward to stand beside Keanu. Her presence added a silent reinforcement to his words. I should really get going, Mrs. Harrington finally managed, her voice lacking its earlier confidence. My charity luncheon. For the children's hospital, right? Keanu asked. Yes, actually. She appeared surprised that he knew. That's a good cause, he said with genuine approval. Helping others is important work. Something complicated passed across Mrs. Harrington's face, a flicker of shame, quickly suppressed, but not before Sandra caught it. Yes, well, Mrs. Harrington said, gathering her purchases and her composure simultaneously. It's what those of us in fortunate positions should do. I agree completely, Keanu said, and the simplicity of his response somehow carried more weight than any elaborate speech could have. Thomas handed Mrs. Harrington her credit card and receipt. Thank you for your business, Mrs. Harrington. Would you like me to call your driver? No need, she said stiffly. He's waiting outside. She turned to Keanu, making one last attempt to salvage the interaction. Perhaps I'll see you at the film festival next month. My husband always reserves a table at the gala dinner. Maybe, Keanu said, non-committal but not unkind. Enjoy your charity luncheon. Mrs. Harrington nodded once, then turned to leave. As she passed the anniversary couple, she paused briefly, her internal struggle visible on her face. Pride warred with newfound self-awareness, and for a moment, it wasn't clear which would win. Congratulations on your anniversary, she said finally, the words coming out awkwardly but appearing to be genuine. Without waiting for a response, she continued toward the door. As the boutique door closed behind her, a collective breath seemed to be released throughout the store. Diana's husband was the first to break the silence. That, he said with quiet amazement, was something else. The boutique remained unusually quiet for several moments after Mrs. Harrington's departure. It was as if everyone needed time to process what they had just witnessed. Not a loud confrontation or dramatic scene, but something far more rare. A moment of genuine human connection cutting through layers of social pretense. Keanu walked back to where Diana and her husband stood with Sandra. His expression was calm, showing no sign of discomfort or pride about what had just occurred. Sorry for the interruption, he said simply, as if he'd merely stepped away to take a phone call rather than diffuse a tense social situation. Diana looked at him with undisguised admiration. That was, I don't even know what to say. Nothing. Needed, Keanu replied with a small shrug. Some days are harder than others for people. We never really know what someone else is going through. Sandra watched him with a fond smile. This was the Keanu she'd known for years. The man who could have used his fame to embarrass or shame Mrs. Harrington, but instead chose to reach for something more meaningful. It was the same quality that made working with him so different from other Hollywood stars. Thomas approached their small group, his professional demeanor slightly cracked to reveal genuine emotion underneath. Mr. Reeves, Ms. Bullock, I want to apologize for what happened. Mrs. Harrington is a regular client, but her behavior today was completely unacceptable. No need to apologize, Sandra assured him. You handled it gracefully. Still, Thomas insisted, I'd like to offer you all a special experience today. He gestured toward the private viewing room that Mrs. Harrington had found so disappointing. We received several extraordinary pieces this week that aren't on display yet. It would be our honor to show them to you first. Diana's husband shifted, uncomfortably. That's very kind, but we're just here for an anniversary band. Nothing fancy. All the more reason, Thomas said warmly. 30 years deserves to be celebrated properly. He turned to Keanu and Sandra. And it would be our pleasure to thank you both for your discretion. Sandra glanced at Keanu, who gave a slight nod. That sounds lovely, she answered for both of them. Though I should mention we're supposed to meet for lunch soon. This won't take long, Thomas promised. He looked to Diana and her husband. Please join us. The champagne is already chilled. The couple exchanged a look. One of those silent conversations that people develop after decades together. Diana's husband nodded slightly and she smiled in response. We'd be honored, Diana said. Thomas led them toward the back of the store, past curious glances from other customers. As they walked, Lily fell into step beside Sandra. I just wanted to say, Lily began quietly. When I first started working here 6 months ago, Mrs. Harrington made me cry 3 times in my first week. She glanced ahead to make sure Thomas couldn't hear. She complained to management that I wasn't Cartier material. Sandra gave the young woman a sympathetic look. That must have been tough. It was, Lily admitted. I almost quit. But I needed this job for my design school tuition. She hesitated before adding, watching how you both handled her just now, it means a lot to see that kind of kindness. Before Sandra could respond, they reached the private viewing room. Unlike the main showroom with its carefully calibrated lighting and glass displays, this space felt more like an elegant living room. A circular table of polished mahogany stood in the center, surrounded by comfortable chairs upholstered in cream-colored leather. The lighting was warmer here, designed to make diamonds and precious gems reveal their true colors. Please, make yourselves comfortable, Thomas said, gesturing to the chairs. Pavel will bring refreshments and I'll return with some special pieces for your consideration. As they settled around the table, Diana looked somewhat overwhelmed. I never imagined I'd be sitting in a private room at Cartier, she whispered to her husband. Let alone with... She gestured discreetly toward Sandra and Keanu. Life is full of surprises, Keanu remarked with a small smile. Some of them good. Pavel entered with a silver tray bearing fresh champagne and what appeared to be small chocolate, truffles arranged on a porcelain plate. Compliments of the house, he said as he set them on the table. Diana's husband reached for his wallet. We really only came to look at the one ring, he said, a note of worry in his voice. I don't want there to be any confusion about what we can afford. Please, Sandra interjected gently. This is just hospitality. No pressure to buy anything beyond what you came for. Exactly, Keanu agreed. He leaned forward slightly, his posture relaxed but his eyes focused intently on Diana's husband. Today is about celebrating your commitment to each other. Nothing else matters. The sincerity in his voice seemed to ease the man's concern. He nodded, settling back in his chair and accepting a glass of champagne from Pavel. So, Sandra said, turning to Diana with genuine interest. You mentioned earlier that you met in college. Diana nodded, her expression softening at the memory. Physics class. I was terrible at it and needed a tutor. She's being modest, her husband interjected. She got the highest grade in the class by the end of the semester. I was just an excuse to talk to me. Diana laughed, the sound warm and unrehearsed. That's not entirely true. I really did struggle with the formulas at first. And now? Sandra asked. Now she's a high school science teacher, her husband said proudly, inspiring students for over 25 years. That's amazing, Sandra said with genuine admiration. Making a difference in young people's lives like that, it's so important. Thomas returned carrying a leather case about the size of a hardcover book. He placed it carefully on the table and opened it to reveal a velvet-lined interior containing several jewelry pieces. These are from our heritage collection, he explained, inspired by designs from the 1920s, but created with contemporary craftsmanship. He carefully lifted out a bracelet set with diamonds and sapphires in an intricate Art Deco pattern. This piece, for example, uses the same design principles as jewelry worn to the premiere of The Great Gatsby in 1926. Diana gasped softly at the bracelet's beauty, though she made no move to touch it. It's exquisite, Sandra said, admiring how the light played across the stones. May I? She asked, gesturing toward the bracelet. Of course, Thomas replied, carefully handing it to her. Sandra examined it for a moment before passing it to Diana. Here, you should see how it feels. Diana hesitated. Oh, I couldn't. What if I dropped it? Then it would fall on this very soft carpet, Keanu said with a gentle smile. Nothing to worry about. Encouraged, Diana carefully took the bracelet. As she held it up to the light, the sapphires seemed to glow from within. It's like holding a piece of history, she murmured. Thomas nodded approvingly. That's exactly right. Each piece tells a story. He reached back into the case and removed a slender watch with a rectangular face. This design was first created for aviators in the 1930s. The face is angled so it could be read without removing one's hands from the controls. He passed the watch to Keanu, who turned it over in his hands with careful attention. Beautiful craftsmanship, he said appreciatively. You can feel the thought that went into making it. Thomas beamed at the observation. Exactly. It's not just about precious materials. It's about the human connection to what we create and why. He turned to Diana's husband. Which brings me to this. From a small velvet pouch, Thomas produced a wedding band, similar to the one Diana had been considering in the main showroom. But while that one had featured a single modest diamond, this one had 3 small stones set flush with the platinum band. This is from our artisan collection, Thomas explained. The 3 diamonds represent past, present, and future. It's one of our most meaningful designs for anniversaries. Diana's husband looked at the ring with clear appreciation, but also concern. It's beautiful, but I'm afraid it's probably beyond our budget. Thomas smiled. Actually, it's the same price as the one you were considering. The diamonds are smaller, but the design work is what makes it special. Really? Diana asked, unable to hide her surprise. Really, Thomas confirmed. Not everything of value has to overwhelm with its size or flashiness. Sometimes the most meaningful pieces are the quieter ones. As if on cue, Keanu nodded in agreement. I've always thought it's the intention behind a gift that matters most. The thought someone puts into choosing something that connects to a real memory or feeling. Sandra watched the exchange with a warm smile. This was the side of luxury that rarely made it into glossy magazines or social media posts, not the ostentatious displays of wealth that Mrs. Harrington seemed to prefer, but the genuine craftsmanship and meaning that could be found in beautiful things, regardless of their price tag. Diana tried on the ring, her expression softening as she saw how it looked beside her original wedding band. It's perfect, she whispered to her husband, like our story in metal and stone. He nodded, any remaining hesitation vanishing at her reaction. Then it's the one. Thomas discreetly mentioned the price again to confirm, and Diana's husband nodded with certainty. As Thomas prepared to process the purchase, Diana turned to Sandra and Keanu. I don't know how to thank you both, she said. Not just for being so kind after that woman was so rude, but for making our anniversary even more special than we imagined. No thanks needed, Sandra replied warmly. Some days the universe just brings the right people together at the right moment. Keanu nodded, in agreement. Congratulations on 30 years, that's the real achievement worth celebrating today. As Thomas finished the transaction and carefully boxed the ring, Pavel approached with a discreet message for him. Thomas listened, then turned to the group with a slightly embarrassed expression. It seems that news of your presence has spread, he told Sandra and Keanu. There's a small crowd gathering outside the store. We can have your cars brought around to the private entrance if you'd prefer to avoid the attention. Sandra and Keanu exchanged a look, another moment of wordless communication between longtime friends who understood the unique challenges they shared. Actually, Keanu said after a moment, I think Diana and her husband should use the private exit. They should be able to enjoy their special day without being caught in our situation. Thomas blinked in surprise. That's very considerate, Mr. Reeves. We can certainly arrange that. And maybe, Sandra added with a mischievous smile, we could create a small distraction out front? Give them time to slip away unnoticed? Keanu's eyes crinkled with amusement. I think we can handle that. The plan came together quickly. Thomas arranged for Diana and her husband to exit through the boutique's private entrance that typically served only their most elite clients. Meanwhile, Sandra and Keanu prepared to leave through the main door, knowing their appearance would draw whatever attention might otherwise fall on the couple. "Are you sure about this?" Diana asked, clearly touched but concerned. "You've already done so much. We don't want to be more trouble." "It's no trouble," Sandra assured her, giving the woman's hand a gentle squeeze. "Besides, we were heading out anyway. Might as well make it useful." "Consider it our anniversary gift to you," Keanu added with that small, genuine smile of his. A peaceful exit. Thomas returned with a security guard who would escort Diana and her husband to the back entrance. "Your car will be waiting just outside the door," he explained. "My assistant has already called your driver." Diana's husband looked confused. "But we don't have a driver. We took the bus." Thomas blinked in surprise, then quickly recovered. "I took the liberty of arranging a car service to take you wherever you'd like to go. Perhaps lunch to celebrate." "That's incredibly generous," Diana's husband said, clearly overwhelmed by the gesture. "It's our pleasure," Thomas replied. "Cartier prides itself on providing exceptional experiences." Sandra caught the slight shift in his expression as he said, "This," a quiet acknowledgement that the store had failed to live up to that standard earlier with Mrs. Harrington's behavior. This was his way of making amends. "Before you go," Sandra said, reaching into her purse. She pulled out a small notepad and pen, quickly wrote something down and handed it to Diana. "If you're ever in Los Angeles, please call this number. My assistant can arrange for you to visit a film set or have dinner, whatever you might enjoy." Diana stared at the paper in her hand as if it might disappear. "I don't know what to say." "Just promise to keep celebrating each other," Sandra replied. 30 years is just the beginning, right?" Diana's husband nodded firmly. "We're aiming for at least 50. Keanu extended his hand to the man. "It was an honor meeting you both. Truly." After warm goodbyes, Diana and her husband followed the security guard toward the back of the store, the small box containing their anniversary ring held carefully in Diana's hands. As they disappeared from view, Sandra turned to Keanu with a raised eyebrow. "Ready to face the crowd?" He shrugged in that characteristically relaxed way of his. "Just another Tuesday." Thomas led them back to the main showroom, where Lily waited with Sandra's purse and Keanu's helmet. He had apparently arrived on his motorcycle, a detail that made Sandra shake her head with fond exasperation. "Still riding that thing, I see. Best way to get around the city," he replied simply. As they approached the front entrance, they could see a small group of people gathered on the sidewalk outside, phones raised in anticipation. What had started as a quiet shopping trip had somehow transformed into an impromptu public appearance. "I've alerted security," Thomas told them quietly. "They'll make sure no one gets too close." "We'll be fine," Keanu assured him. "We've done this before." Sandra nodded in agreement, though she took a moment to put her sunglasses back on and straighten her cap. It wasn't about vanity. It was about the small shield of privacy these simple items provided in moments like this. "Thank you both again," Thomas said sincerely. "Not just for your discretion with Mrs. Harrington, but for how you treated Diana and her husband. It was refreshing to see." "They're good people," Sandra replied. "Those are the ones worth celebrating." With a final nod to Thomas and Lily, they pushed through the glass doors and onto the sidewalk of Rodeo Drive. The reaction was immediate. Excited gasps, the rapid clicking of phone cameras, people calling their names. Most kept a respectful distance, but a few bolder fans stepped forward asking for photos or autographs. Sandra and Keanu exchanged a look, silently agreeing to give a few minutes to the unexpected crowd. It was part of the unspoken contract of their public lives, the exchange of privacy for the connection with people who supported their work. They separated slightly, each engaging with a different section of the small crowd, signing a few autographs, and allowing a few photos. From the corner of her eye, Sandra spotted a familiar cream-colored suit across the street. Mrs. Harrington stood beside a black luxury car, watching the scene unfold. Even from a distance, the conflict on her face was visible. a mixture of regret, embarrassment, and lingering pride. For a moment, their eyes met through the crowd. Sandra could have easily looked away, could have pretended not to see her. Instead, she offered a small nod of acknowledgement, not friendly exactly, but not unkind either. Just a simple recognition of another human being having a complicated day. Mrs. Harrington hesitated, then gave a stiff nod in return before sliding into her waiting car. "Excuse me, Ms. Bullock?" A young woman with wide eyes had approached while Sandra was distracted. "I just wanted to say thank you. Oh, your work in that film about the lawyer who takes on the corporation really inspired me to go to law school." Sandra refocused her attention on the fan, genuinely touched. "That means more to me than you know. How's law school going?" "Graduated last year," the young woman said proudly. "Working for the public defender's office now." "That's fantastic," Sandra replied with a warm smile. "The world needs more people like you." After a few more minutes, a staff member from the boutique discreetly signaled that Diana and her husband had safely departed. Keanu made his way back to Sandra's side, his helmet tucked under his arm. "Lunch?" he asked simply. "Starving," she confirmed. "Though I'm not getting on that death machine of yours." He chuckled. "My car's around the corner, I just ride the bike when I'm solo." They said their goodbyes to the small crowd, thanking them for their support, and began walking down Rodeo Drive together. Despite their fame, most people now gave them space content with the brief interaction they'd already had. "So," Sandra said as they walked, "did you know that was going to happen when you showed up early?" Keanu shook his head. "Just had a feeling I should get there sooner. Gut instinct." "Well, your timing was perfect, as usual." He glanced at her with a small smile. "It worked out okay?" "More than okay," she assured him. "I think Diana and her husband will be telling that story for the next 30 years of their marriage." "Good," he said simply. "They seemed like nice people." They walked in comfortable silence for a moment before Sandra spoke again. "You know what I keep thinking about? What you said to Mrs. Harrington about the student who acknowledged you when you were working as a janitor." Keanu looked slightly embarrassed. "Ah, that. Was that a real story?" He nodded, his eyes on the sidewalk ahead of them. "Yeah. Long time ago now. And did you really recognize him years later as a waiter?" Another nod. "At a place in Venice Beach. He didn't make a big deal about it, just did his job. But I remembered." Sandra considered this as they walked. It was so perfectly Keanu, noticing the small kindnesses, remembering the people who saw him as a person before he became a star. In an industry built on surface appearances and fleeting connections, he somehow remained anchored to something more genuine. "You know that story's going to be all over social media by tomorrow," she pointed out. "The customer who was there will definitely share what happened." Keanu shrugged. "Maybe it should be. Not because of us, but because of what it says about how we treat each other. Might make someone think twice before judging someone based on what they're wearing or how much money they have." "The wisdom of Keanu Reeves," Sandra teased gently, but her eyes were warm with affection for her friend. He ducked his head slightly, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just stuff I've picked up along the way. Nothing special." They turned the corner, leaving the boutique and the crowd behind them. Ahead, Keanu's car waited, not the flashy sports car many might expect from a Hollywood star, but a well-maintained older model that he'd owned for years. "Italian place on Wilshire?" he suggested as he unlocked the passenger door for her. "Perfect," she agreed, "though I'm not sure anything could top the excitement of this morning's shopping trip." "Just a normal Tuesday," Keanu said with a hint of a smile. "For us, maybe," Sandra replied as she settled into the passenger seat. "But for Diana and her husband, I think we just became part of their love story." "Good," Keanu said simply as he started the engine. "That's worth more than anything in that store." As they pulled away from Rodeo Drive, neither noticed the young woman watching them from the boutique entrance. Lily stood with her phone in hand, having just posted a simple message to her social media account. "Just witnessed two people with every reason to be arrogant show more kindness and humility than most. Fame reveals character, It doesn't create it. The post would go viral by evening, shared by thousands who found something hopeful in the simple story of kindness in an unexpected place. But by then, Sandra and Keanu would be long gone, sharing a quiet lunch and the comfortable conversation of old friends, unaware of the ripples their actions had created. For them, it had just been about doing the right thing in the moment. For everyone else, it became a reminder that beneath the glamour and the headlines, the most important things remain refreshingly simple. Seeing others, respecting their dignity, and choosing kindness when it would be easier not to. Just another Tuesday. On Rodeo Drive, except for all the ways it wasn't.